I will be passing it off to Anya next. She will be sharing her research on reading the room, teacher navigation, and sex education in a Viennese secondary school. So, Anya is from the North Carolina coast, and similarly to Cameron, she loves the sea and her cat, Mr. Cornelius. She did her Iris internship with a secondary school in Vienna, and not to give away too much about her research, but I have read that she has been the unofficial sex educator of her global friend group, and she spent her adolescence replying to hate comments on the Planned Parenthood Instagram, which, hell yeah. So I will now pass it off to Anya.
Yay, thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'm gonna try to share. Oh, my sharing screen isn't working. Oh, is it working? Can you guys see my screen?
Yes. Yeah, we got it.
Okay, great. This is my Prezi. So, violent pornography, sexual AI bots, misogynistic podcasts, and the sleazy older brother of your child's best friend. These are some of the places children today will go to for their questions on sex and relationships when formal sex education fails them. And this brings me to my global issue. When sex education misses the mark, which now more than ever it does, the consequences do not stay in the classroom. The kids who receive inadequate sex ed carry these gaps into their adult life and relationships. This can affect how they understand consent, how they treat their partners, and how they recognize or fail to recognize when something is wrong or abusive. And so throughout this presentation, I'd like you all to think back to your own sex education and the ways it may have failed or supported you. So the background is that research links comprehensive sex education, when it's done well, to real reductions in gender-based violence and sexual intimate partner violence. And so it can function as a prevention tool, but a few things get in the way of this actually working. The first is that kids today are facing massive amounts of exposure. What they believe about sex, relationships, and bodies is greatly influenced by peers, social media, family pressures, and an access to insane amounts of sexual content. And research has already shown an increase in unconsensual choking during first sexual experiences because of the influence of aggressive and violent pornography, which is made by men for men and accessed by your 12-year-old who has no knowledge or skills to critically evaluate what they are watching. And so, if families don't address sex education with their children, and a lot of times they don't, kids won't feel safe going to them with questions, but they will go somewhere. And usually that will be a group of equally uninformed, but a little bit more confident peers. And so this is where sex ed comes in. If we have quality sex education, kids can have a space to learn and ask their questions with a trusted adult. But access to that kind of space is widely uneven, and where it does exist, it rarely covers the emotional and more complicated aspects of sexuality that most children are likely already navigating. And these gaps can cause real harm. If a child doesn't know that rape can happen inside relationships, which was a huge misconception among the students at my research site, that leaves them deeply vulnerable to partner abuse. And if a child is watching aggressive pornography without realizing it's a massive misrepresentation of sex, without understanding that consent is foundational and required, and starts to absorb this distorted reality during their most formative years when they're finally becoming solid in themselves and their beliefs that will affect their future relationships. And these gaps aren't getting any smaller with the way technology is advancing. You can now make porn of any woman with just a photo of her face. AI bots are claiming to help with connection, but they're really just sucking these kids in. There's algorithms, social media, beauty expectations. These kids are getting into stuff we probably just don't even know about. And so it falls on teachers to address these gaps. And that brings me to my purpose. Most research has focused on the broader levels of sex ed, like formal curriculum and policy, but less work documents what actually happens in schools that already have a good, well-established sex education, where teachers have the autonomy to go deeper in these topics. And little research isolates these micro-level everyday teaching practices that make sex education work. And so the purpose of my research is to understand how teachers navigate everyday tensions to build positive engagement around sex education and violence prevention. And so to do this, I conducted qualitative research at a multicultural secondary school in Vienna. I did 3 months of classroom observation of everyday classroom life instead of the formal sex education lessons. I did 6 interviews with staff, 5 with teachers, 3 of whom were in charge of delivering or supporting sex ed, 2 who taught different subjects, and then the headmaster, which is like the principal. And so with the biology and sex ed teachers, I asked about their philosophy when teaching the subjects, the tensions that come up, the hardest topics to teach, and how they navigate this, especially in a multicultural and pretty conservative religious community. And also how they navigate all of this in terms of violence prevention. With the history and English teacher, which were the other 2 teachers, I asked them to talk about the everyday classroom dynamics and how they just handled everyday tensions. And then with the headmaster, I discussed his thoughts on sex education and his role in the school. And so for the findings, I found a lot, but I'm going to focus on a few of what I think's the most important. And the first is the exposure gap. Not only the gap between what children are exposed to outside of school and what they actually learn in sex ed, but also the gap in how much exposure each kid has already had by the time their formal sex ed begins. So, depending on their parents, siblings, culture, religion, developmental phase, and peer group, one child starting sex ed can range from extreme exposure to online content and loads of distorted misinformation to a child who has never even heard the topic being discussed at home, who is so uncomfortable and resistant that they won't even hug someone of a different gender because they're scared of getting pregnant. Both of these kids are in the same classroom, and this was a constant source of tension that teachers had to navigate. And the second is how important the individual teacher is to sex education. Their identity, gender, and sexuality all influences how the children perceive them and how they try to relate or challenge them. A teacher's beliefs and passions about the topic impact how the formal curriculum is interpreted and delivered. A teacher's ability to make students feel safe and handle these tensions well and the tensions and the things that students bring into the classroom is one of the key factors in whether sex ed actually lands and can function for violence prevention. And at the school, teachers had a good amount of autonomy, which left a lot of room for them to adapt the content and go deeper into the topics that mattered. And that's what created the conditions where real, meaningful learning can happen and how it can function to work as violent prevention. And the third is how teachers at the school operated well outside their formal roles. A majority of the kids came from families who were struggling, children of migrants, lower socioeconomic backgrounds, or very conservative communities that gave them no access to reliable information. And teachers became, for a lot of these kids, one of the only reliable sources of accurate information they had, and sometimes the only trusted adult in their lives. And they would handle things way outside of just basic teaching. Children would disclose a lot of things to the teachers, a lot of like heavy subjects that are going on at home. One biology teacher put it, it was just like some kids were so glad they had someone to talk to. And so, beyond just classroom teaching, when teachers understood the weight of their role, they could really connect students to these external resources like clinics, hotlines, and experts brought into the classroom and give them advice and keep in touch with them outside of school. So they would always have somewhere else to go to for any questions. And so implications, students having access to this kind of education requires the position teachers are in to be well funded, well trained, and supported. Institutional support can back up what teachers are already doing every day. One of the biology teachers said this about what she wished policymakers understood. They should understand that teaching sex ed directly relates to citizens that they will have later down the line. So this is not just about safe sex, it extends to healthy relationships, healthy lives, and giving children the tools to navigate a world that was handed to them a little younger than it should be. And so my conclusion is a society that gives children unrestricted access to the most complex and consequential dimensions of human sexuality, then underinvests in the educators responsible for helping them make sense of it, is a society failing its next generation of citizens.